You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
And joining me now to talk about this campaign is the campaign director of Fight Equalization, also the Alberta director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Kevin Lacey. Kevin, thanks for coming on today.
Andrew, thanks for having me.
So we've got a few weeks left until the referendum. For those who haven't been following it here, I know the question is about removing it from the Constitution, but fundamentally, what is really at play here for people?
Fundamentally, it's about the unfairness of the equalization formula to the province of Alberta. And what the problem is that Alberta for years has been contributing far more than we've been getting back. And you would think that contributing that amount of money would buy you some goodwill, that it would get you something in return. And instead, all we've gotten as a result of all those contributions is we've seen our energy blocked in respect to pipelines. We've battled with British Columbia and Quebec, both with regards to getting those pipelines built. We've seen a carbon tax from Ottawa. So we keep contributing and being generous. Yet at the same time, provinces and the federal government are basically sticking it to us and not giving us the things that we need to succeed.
Yeah, and I think Quebec is a particularly notable example of this. The Quebec government, even an ostensibly conservative government in Quebec, has come in with a very anti-Canadian energy agenda and plan. We have the Premier, François Legault, calling Alberta oil dirty energy, yet Quebec still insists on the money from Alberta that only comes, generally speaking, because of the success of this sector.
Well, that's exactly right. And, so the entire equalization envelope is about $20 billion. Quebec gets about $13 billion of that, which means they get 65% of all the equalization dollars. And to put that in perspective, each Quebec resident, that equals about $1,500 per person. That's a lot of money that Quebec is getting from the rest of Canada. At the same time, then, Quebec, while it takes this amount of money from Canada, rejects Canada's resources and rejects particularly Alberta's resources, the one that's contributing a large portion of that money to it. Imagine if Andrew, you were meeting your friends and you were generous enough to provide them some little extra cash, and then you asked them for a little favor and they told you to go pound sand. That's essentially what Quebec is doing to Alberta. And for years, Alberta's just kind of put up with it. And sure, they've made a few statements here and there. This goes way back to Peter Lougheed in the 1980s, when Lougheed, during both the Charlottetown Accord and the Meech Lake Accord, put his foot down and said that Alberta wasn't going to contribute more than their fair share, but yet it continued. Then Ralph Klein came in. He stood up to Ottawa. But then the payments continued after Klein. Then the government changed, and even Premier Notley, who was an NDP premier, she put her foot down and said this equalization formula is not fair to Alberta, and nothing ever changed. So to Jason Kenney's credit, the current premier of Alberta, he's decided that, look, enough is enough. We can keep going to Canada and complaining about the equalization formula and complaining about what Quebec's saying, but we're not getting anywhere. So we need to go out and have this referendum, which is happening on October 18th, and show Canada that Albertans are mad that their money is being mistreated and they want to see real change. And to be honest, at this point, I'm not sure what is really left for the government of Alberta to do. They're really at a last straw, and this is a last-ditch effort to try to make some real changes.
Is the issue the formula for equalization or the existence of equalization itself, with the caveat for those not familiar that actually getting rid of it would require a constitutional amendment, but amending the formula is actually relatively simple?
Yeah, I think for us in particular, what we want to see is reform of the system. And we also, I think a lot of this, Andrew, is actually political, which is we want to assert what the grievance of Alberta is in the hope that recipient provinces will understand the position of the province and start to embrace some of the things that is allowing this money to come into their province. So really what I think we're looking for is some goodwill on behalf of many of these premiers who are sticking it to Alberta. So reform is part of it. The equalization question actually asks, do we support removing the Constitution, removing equalization from the Constitution? And I think that's really the whole point of that, is to just kind of lay the marker for what Alberta expects in the upcoming years with regards to continued negotiations on equalization.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is important to point out here is that Alberta has obviously had some great times over the years, but in the last few years, with the downturn in the sector, the oil and gas sector, which is the predominant source of wealth in Alberta, things have been a bit tough. But the province has still been on the hook for equalization in those more difficult years.
Yeah, and that's been a really tough pill to swallow because you haven't, like over the last 6.5 years, Alberta has really had a rough go. And many, at one point we were in double digits in unemployment, one of the highest unemployments in all of Canada, highest unemployment rates in all of Canada. So we've had a really rough time. Some of that is as a result of poor policies out of Ottawa. Some of that is also related outside the border, which is just the cost of energy and the price of oil. But families have here had a really hard time. The province has not had the money to fund, say, schools and hospitals and building new roads. Yet they see down a few flights away in Quebec, things are going really, really well. And meanwhile, our money, when it's needed here at home, is going to a province like Quebec, which doesn't need it. So that's the type of reform that I think we need to see. And I think if you're one of those families that's struggling to make ends meet and watching your tax dollars go to other parts of the country, while at the same time your schools are suffering, you got a big problem with that.
Yeah, and I know that just looking at the numbers here, you mentioned how much the average Quebecer, or how much it works out to be on average that a Quebecer is receiving from this. On the flip side of it, you have the average Albertan having to pay $600, I believe it is, on this $3 billion a year that the province is spending. And if you're an Alberta taxpayer, that's $3 billion that's not going to fix the roads, that's not going into the healthcare system,
That's
which
right.
we've been hearing a lot about in Alberta, that's not going into schools. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and then the fiscal situation here isn't that hot either. And that's maybe a debate for another show of how we ended up there. But given that Alberta families are struggling themselves, and I think if most families and most Albertans are willing to be generous with the rest of the country, they have been for many, many years. But given these tough times when everyone else is cutting back, the equalization formula, actually, with the way it's set up, is going to increase over the next few years. So this commitment that Albertans are under at a time when they don't have any money is actually just increasing. And that puts the strain on the public services even higher and makes it more difficult to take that this money is being sent to Ottawa.
So let's talk about the campaign itself. I'm assuming you're doing more than just chatting with me, and although I love having you on the show. What are you going to be doing between now and October 18th?
So we've launched a separate society called Society for Albertans Against Equalization. We're going to be heading out and campaigning on the road, trying to convince Albertans to vote yes in this referendum to remove equalization from the Constitution. We've just launched new radio ads that are on our website. Feel free to check them out. That are talking about this issue. Our new billboards will be going up later on in the week. And we'll be continuing to do things like you and I are doing today, Andrew, just to try to talk to more and more Canadians and more, particularly Albertans, about getting out to vote on October 18th, voting yes in the referendum, and finally standing up for Alberta so that Alberta can make a stand and don't continually see our money go to when our money is not respected.
And what constitutes a win for you on this?
I think we're going to have to see election night what the win is. Let's be honest, referendums in Canada are always unpredictable. And there's a lot of politics going on in Alberta that's far outside of the referendum. But really anything over 50% is a victory for us.
Yeah, that's the majority of Albertans saying that they can't really abide by the status quo. So very well said. You can find out more about the campaign at fightequalization.ca. Kevin Lacey is the campaign director and Alberta director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Kevin, thanks for coming on today. Good to talk to you as always.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.